second day of this multi-conference that for this year is organized here in Modena. This is the second day of the second year of the multi-conference we are organizing. Today, the session is about the need of good theories and good research in order to innovate learning, also in digital environments. The two guests we have here today are Mary Kalantzis and Bill Cope. They are from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Mary has been the Dean of the College of Education for 10 years. She just ended the position of Dean last week, after 10 years in charge. Happy woman now, yeah. She has been quoted as one of the most influential dean of the College of Education in US. She has been as well the president of the Conference of College of Education in Australia, because they come originally from Australia. And it's world leader in new literacy studies. Bill Cope is as well a professor of Illinois Urbana-Champaign and the director of Common Ground Publishing, that is a very innovative publishing company. And in these two positions is working to innovate not just in terms of theory and pedagogical studies, but as well as in terms of production of innovative digital artifacts that help students and educationalists to work with new pedagogies. I'm very happy to introduce them because my own work as a postgraduate student many years ago has been deeply influenced by their work. So I'm very happy, and I hope that you will benefit today in this couple of hours of conversation from their insights and their contribution. Okay, Mary, please.
All right. Thank you very much. I'll stand up so I can see you better. Good morning to all of you. I want to thank Pierpaolo for inviting us. We have become close to many colleagues in Italy over the many years that we've worked together, and it's wonderful to see so many people turn up at this conference, this kind of conference around the very difficult, complex issues that we've discussed. Yesterday's keynote addresses were, I thought, magnificent. They laid out the possibilities, they laid out the problems, and they laid out the challenges to us. But it was, from my perspective, I was saying to Pierpaolo, I've seen a lot of progress. People putting their foot in the water, getting their hands dirty, so to speak, experimenting, seeing what we need to do to prepare the learners of the future. So Bill and I are happy to be with you today, and it's a joint presentation because we've worked together for 30 years in Australia and now in America to address the issues that I think we're all interested in as educators. You don't become an educator because you want to be rich. You don't become an educator because you want to be famous. You become an educator because you want to change the world for the better, not just simply for what it is. And you have to be always conscious of the context. And even in our lifetimes, in our own lifetimes, the context has changed in a phenomenal way. And I think we need to be reminded of this. So the first point I want to make to you is a very simple kind of point. The anxiety we have about whether change is possible because we live so fully in the moment. Our real lives seem to be the lives of the past and the future. But in fact, if you look at education, although this university system in Italy is, 850 years old, a very old system, the formal public schooling system that we're a part of has only been around in Italy and the rest of the world for only 150 years. The one that is based on the textbook, and with the textbook, the exam. These are the two constraints or context dimensions for the kind of education that we understand in schools and universities. And what did the book do? It created a canon, it became authority, it became closed, you know, it wasn't open in the dialogical sense that the universities were dialogical and learning was dialogical. It became very fixed, very authoritarian, very controlled, and it was about preparing particular kind of people for a particular kind of society. But we need to remember it's only 150 years old. It's a baby, really, in terms of human evolution and the time that we have on the planet. And now we're facing something, a different moment. What is that moment? How does it influence us? Pierpaolo said just a few minutes ago that he spent years talking about things and he doesn't know the point at which something changes. And all of a sudden you see the change, but you don't know how you've influenced it. We're in that moment. And we need to come together like this to learn from each other and to keep each other focused, because we're going to make a lot of mistakes on the way, and the mistakes are not endless mistakes, and that's also important. We have to have the courage to experiment. But I want to make a second point, and that is today, our lives, our everyday lives as learners across the lifespan are becoming more and more apart from what we actually do in those places we call education. Those places that was called school. So if you just look here, this came from Cisco, a piece of work, across from 6 a.m. in the morning to, you know, midnight, to right into the night. If you see the school part, right, that's the least time in which people are engaged with meaning making across every other time, whether it's relating to friends, sending messages, making notes, doing homework, you name it, whatever we do, and all of you've got your little phones out there, you can't live without them, right? No matter where you are, you're connected to some kind of meaning making. This is not just technology, we are making meaning, we are communicating, we are doing our jobs, we are working, we are relating. But the school sector, the formal school sector, the formal university centre, the lives we live in those learning places, because remember, we live and learn. We don't just learn without living. The living in those places is very different from the living outside. And it's the only industry that's been this slow to address the impact of the digital. You can't work on cars, automobiles, without digital. You can't be a cook even without the digital, because you're referencing and ordering and doing everything through new technology. Yet the schools, you see, still remain apart. And yesterday, one of our speakers spoke to that. The second speaker spoke to the problems there. But we go back to that earlier point, right, which is the book and the test. They are the two constraints that continue since their invention, right, which was a breakthrough invention, to be the constraints that have produced this effect. Because the architecture of school is based on the book and the test that comes with it. So I want to make that point again because it's a very important point to be making each time. The other point I want to make, and in terms of the work that Bill and I do, all our work, every single bit of our work is about transforming learners. That's what it's about. How do we take a learner, a child or an adult, from one point to another? From not understanding physics to understanding physics, from not understanding philosophy to understanding philosophy. That is our job. And the only measure is how far they shift. And yesterday, in your little description, you showed shift from the digital for one group. How do we shift for all groups? That's our challenge. Our challenge is, given the complexities of today, the new kind of knowledge, the new kind of understanding that people need, our measure always must be the degree to which learners are able to live and participate in a society effectively. So I want to remind us of that. It's not about whether teachers feel good, whether teachers have more skills. The measure is the degree to which that impacts on learners. Right, so over 20 years ago, a group of us, Bill and I, were in Australia. And what we were saying, that we were talking, coming to conferences talking, and yet the gap between performing learners and non-performing learners was getting bigger. We were getting more famous in the academy, we were publishing, but why was this gap getting bigger? What were we doing? So we brought a group of people together there on the other side, and we formed what became known as the Multiliteracies Project, where we were thinking, what do we need to understand the future and to prepare learners for the future? What do we know must be part of any learning ecology, whether it's in a traditional classroom or in any other kind of ecology? And at that point, and yesterday I think you used the word design too, how do we think about the educator not as a public servant, but as a true professional, right? A true professional who designs appropriately for learners, right? Given the kinds of issues that are in the world. And what is the social purpose? And I'll go back to it, and the EU has been talking about this for a long time. Learners, citizens, workers. Remember those three. We are preparing new learners, new citizens, new workers. But what are the three things in any ecology that we must take on board? And I'll use the word diversity. You can use any word you like. Today we use the word personalisation. But it's the same point, that in our classrooms, even in this room, even though you all look homogenous, you all look the same, your interest, your orientation to knowledge, what you know and what you're hearing is different. And if I want to touch you, if I want to affect you, if I want to transform you, I need to know that, right? So the old textbook and the test, which was about assimilation, sameness, homogeneity, and we taught to the middle, will not work for anybody anymore. I am sure that all of us don't even read the same news anymore, right? I'm sure all of us don't participate in affinity groups that are exactly the same, right? Diversity, deep individual diversity, has become more complex, and the task of society even more complex. And both those things matter, the individual and the social. But the way you get to the social nowadays is harder than before, but still as necessary. So diversity, if you want to make a difference, you have to factor that in, whether it's in an e-learning environment or in a face-to-face environment. It makes a difference. Secondly, multimodality. When a child comes to school, right, they draw, they touch, they move, they feel, they sing. And what do? We strip all that out. Do not touch, do not draw, do not move. Put your hand up to go to the bathroom. And what do? We inculcate them into some symbolic system, right? And in the end, the only thing we measure is alphabetical literacy, right? Strip it all out, keep still, and keep producing alphabetical literacy, because remember, the book, that's what it valued, the most important thing, and you need to reproduce that. Still very important, but as I'm going to argue, and we're going to argue, it's not the only way in which powerful meaning is made nowadays. Multimodality needs to be part of how we understand the world. Multiple languages, multiple dialects. The new technology allows us to do extraordinary things across visual and audio and a range of things. These have become meaning-making tools, not just decorative things. We make meaning that way. So the production of meaning has changed. And thirdly, but more importantly, is pedagogy. And I think I heard you say yesterday, pedagogy is not instructional sequences. Instructional sequences keep people busy. Pedagogy is actually understanding what is needed in the moment for a particular purpose in a particular domain. A professional makes those professional judgments. It's not turning the page of the textbook. Pedagogy is one of those things that has disappeared. We heard about constructivism yesterday as perhaps a better model, but really the textbook strips all that away for many teachers in many contexts as they just follow routines. So, 3 things that make an impact on learner performance, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of them, because we need to, when we look at any piece of new technology for learning, to say the degree to which they're there. Right, so just to take the first one, diversity is a very complex thing to understand, because usually we say gender, race, class. That's what we say. But if you put a whole bunch of women together, just because they're women doesn't mean that you understand what makes them work, right? Just because you put people of Italian or Greek background together doesn't mean you understand them. I'm of Greek background, but I'm very different from somebody from Greece, for example, or very different. Even a Greek American is different from a Greek Australian, right? So Diversity, which is gross demographics, which is usually what we talk about, is not very helpful in any learning environment, and in fact can and does do damage. You get a negative reaction when you go in and say, well, today we're going to talk about Italians, or I'm going to try and understand you as an Italian, when I don't know anything about it and I'm trying to project some kind of stereotype or some narrow understanding. What we need when we talk about diversity is what's on this other side, the life world. Again, what kind of professional, what kind of teacher can take the time to understand the life world of all their learners? And on a MOOC when you have 7,000 of them, right? But the life world matters. Your orientation to living. I won't go through all those points, but it's a different way of understanding diversity, and it feeds into this pedagogical imperative of personalisation, which we use as a term now all the time. And of course there are strategies that you need. You need to be much more flexible, you need to have different options, and also you need to be involved in team teaching. The one teacher, 20 children for the new world, for these imperatives, is not something that's going to work. It means a different architecture than the one that was related to the book and the text. I'll go back because the book and the text are such an iconic prisms of the architecture that has evolved with education as we understand it. The second point is multiliteracies. We are born into meaning-making tools, born into them. What are our kids born into today? I have a 7-year-old granddaughter. She's on her machine non-stop. She can buy things on that machine. She makes meaning on it. She FaceTimes. What's that word? FaceTime, yes, she'll ring me. She says, yeah, what are you doing? Where are you? You know, she's 7. She has been born into a very different way of making meaning than we were born in. When I was born into my family, my Greek immigrant family to Australia, we didn't even have a book in our house. My mother used to sit us under an icon, and she would pick up a little book like this, and we would recite the Psalms together. When I grew up, I realized she couldn't read. She just knew them off by heart. She just held the book, right? In my lifetime, right, from that moment to my granddaughter's moment is an extraordinary change in what we are born into, right? So it really does matter that we are born into designs. We can call it grammar, but then working on them, we give them meaning, and then we leave designs in the world. So we must think of meaning making in that kind of dynamic way rather than just formulas of grammars, the grammars of language and the grammars of meaning making. But if meaning making now is audio and oral and written and visual and spatial and gestural, what questions do we ask to give them the same value point? So what we've tried to do in our work, and actually we're commissioned now by Cambridge to write this up in a more formal way, is what common questions can we ask across those meaning-making areas, and what is different about them that we need to know. I'll give you an example of the power of multimodality at the moment. It's a simple one, but you have to forgive me for using this one. Abu Ghraib, you know the prison in Iraq, in Iraq where all that stuff happened? Well, the Red Cross went into Abu Ghraib and wrote a description of what was happening in the prison, a tome. It was digitized, it was online, everybody read it. It was online for a long time, governments read it, you know, prime ministers, presidents read it. It had no effect, although it was in perfect, beautiful alphabetical English. Somebody went in there with a phone and went click. Remember that picture with the hood? Right? That one picture had more power than the tome, and it circulated around the world. Gunter Kress speaks now that we've shifted into a visual moment. Instagram, you make meaning by sending pictures, right? You don't even put text, even just a few words. So the visual becomes so important. The whole electoral campaign in America at the moment revolves around television talk, right, of people who are celebrities. No content, no substance, just the image, right? The image of a strong man That's all circulating, the image of a strong man and the non-appearance of a weak woman. That's the conversation. Where is Hillary? Well, she's not on the television. It's only Trump who's there all the time. The image has become such a very powerful way of making meaning and stripped of fact, stripped of truth. It's a very different... How do we prepare learners across the disciplines to understand the power of multimodality? It's our responsibility in history, in science, in whatever area we're in. So this is another part of our research which is very important and significant. Now, on the point of pedagogy, I'm going to say things very quickly, but there is no pedagogy that is appropriate if everything else I've said is correct. If learners are diverse, if multimodality matters, you have to know what to do with each individual, with each group, with each class. You have to make a decision. So the pedagogical approaches that have existed, right? We've had situated practice and experiential, which comes from progressivist pedagogy, which says start where somebody's at. You know, you have to be there. But if you just start there and stay there for too long and don't transition out of that, you do damage pedagogically as well. So that's one approach, you know, immersing people in the known, immersing people in the new, so they can become, move into something, right? And that's experiential and situated practice. And then we have what's traditional curriculum or traditional pedagogy, which is overt instruction and conceptualizing, right? Front-end loading, you know, naming something and understanding how something works. Again, the traditionalists and direct instruction, we heard about that yesterday, come out of that tradition. And then we have transformed or critical pedagogy, which is about, critical framing and analysing, which is what is the meaning of what you've been immersed in, or what is the meaning of what you've been taught, which also is important. And finally, of course, transformed an application, whether it's creatively or in a test. You as an educator need to know when to use which. It's not that you get stuck in one or the other. The direct instruction people are stuck with overt instruction. You cannot move off the script, right? Follow, 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 follow. In Australia, they've reintroduced a direct instruction, which was invented at the University of Illinois, my college, right, many years ago. They've just introduced it to Aboriginal students, right? Because they said they're falling behind because they had too much experiential learning. Too much learning their own language, too much going hunting and recreating, you know, the past. And now it was time to move them into the modern world, and we're going to do it through instruction, direct instruction. Well, both of them are good, and both of them are important at different times. But any time you take pedagogical approach as a fashion and apply it to everybody, you've done people a disservice. Back, the teacher as professional, the teacher as a co-designer, the teacher as a collaborator, right? How do we do this? Very important. And finally, I want to just put it together. So we have the issue of diversity, the multiliteracies, the design and co-design, the teacher as designer and co-designer with learners, right? And the pedagogical approach. But what we've decided, what Bill and I, over the 30 years that we've worked, that we have a different opportunity now with some resources that allow us to answer the problems of those challenges in each one of those important dimensions that we know make a difference, okay? So we're looking at the affordances of the digital. What is there in the digital that might allow us to address those issues in a way that we couldn't address them before? Because one teacher and 30 students doing the sorts of things that I've just said is almost impossible. That's why teachers resist. It's very hard. They stick to the turning the page and doing the test. Because the architecture and the accountability that goes with that architecture makes it very hard. So our second speaker spoke about how difficult it is. Likewise in the university. Where is teaching in the university? How much do we value it? How do we get through our P&T processes? How do we assess our students? That determines the curriculum, right? So what we did was to say, what are the affordances? What are the affordances of the new technology, right? And Bill's going to show you an example of what we did, how we integrated all those pedagogical issues with the affordances. Well, the first affordance you all know is you can learn anytime. Right, learning happens all the time, formal, semi-formal, informal, right? But we're involved with formal learning. So how do we change formal learning, right, in order for it to allow for the new habits of mind of the 21st century, which is constant, ubiquitous access to knowledge, information, the potential of learning. How do we build that in, right? Doesn't have to happen in the 1 hour of the classroom. Doesn't have to happen in the day of the classroom. Doesn't have to just involve the teachers. You can bring anybody in. You can bring world experts. You can bring others. It's an affordance. It's an affordance of the digital. What do we do with it, right? In the classroom. We are doing lots of things with that outside of the classroom, but what do we do in the classroom? Secondly, active knowledge making, not just receiving knowledge, but making knowledge. Why we as learners can produce that knowledge now, to be makers of that knowledge. And in fact, when you look at the research in that kind of activity, it has a very high effect in performance. The more you engage learners in making the knowledge rather than just receiving and memorizing the knowledge, then more likely they are to maintain that knowledge and to transfer it in meaningful ways. So active knowledge making. How much time is there for that in the traditional classroom, right, in the way it's organized? Secondly, multimodal meaning. We cannot make meaning in any discipline without multimodality now. It's just not possible, right? It's not effective. How do we, in the learning environment, use multimodality? You know, in medicine now, they're using simulations and videos, and there are whole journals that are now based on the video and the exegesis that goes with the video. A whole shift, because it's much more precise, much more complex, much more effective. Recursive feedback. This is really, really, really important. The test is at the end. Too late. I think you said it. It's a label. You need assessment as you go, instantly. It has to come back at the point of need. There's an affordance. When you're working in cyberspace, when you're working on the cloud, when you're working in the digital domain, you can get every click. You get a response to every click, right? So recursive feedback. Again, there are high effects when you import recursive feedback as part of the learning experience. Collaborative intelligence. Remember, do not copy. Cheating. We thought cheating was a problem. But if you want to solve big problems, you've got to share knowledge. You have to collaborate. You can't solve big problems in the world without sharing the information, sharing the expertise. So this idea of cheating, this idea of just doing the tick a box, just important thing, is no way to address the issues of the world and the complexities we have at the moment. Again, collaborative intelligence, when it's deployed either in a traditional classroom or using the affordance of the online environment, has high effects. It builds strong knowledge, right, and scaffolds. Metacognition, thinking about your thinking about what you're doing. Again, you know, we understand in the cyber world, it's very possible to do it, to get peer-to-peer feedback, to get any kind of feedback, to reflect yourself, for the professional to address. That affordance is made much more available to an education system in the digital world. And of course, differentiated learning, that you can see for yourself that in a diverse classroom, you can design the work differently for different people in a much more fluid way and a much more direct way in the cyber environment than anywhere else. And I don't know if I said it earlier, but the revolution in the digital age is not the contraptions we have. The revolution is the manufacturing of meaning in a multimodal way has been available to all of you. You are not a printing press. You are not in the photographic industry. You're not in the audio industry. You go click, 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 and you can produce all of those things. The digital allows you to produce meaning in multimodal ways. It's the manufacturing of meaning that is the revolution. Manufacturing of meaning. How can we as educators not harness that affordance for meaning making in science, in history, in philosophy, in dance, right? You name it, right? That is what makes it critical. So these are the affordances, just some of the main affordances of the digital age. And what Bill's going to show you now is the way in which we've taken, as I said, our pedagogical insights, the affordances of new technology, and to create inventing. I was saying this earlier. Mostly what we do, because we're stuck with the book and the test, right? We purchase what is available. And even in our universities, in my university system, we say, we'll wait till the tools are made. So we take the PowerPoint, the Moodle, whatever has been made for other things and massage it to use it for our students. We have to invent the tools because we know what we want. The tools that we get are not what we want. And I was saying earlier that the PowerPoint, you know the PowerPoint, it was invented and used mostly in the military in America. Why? That's why it has bullet points, right? Do this, do this, do this, do this. If you want to use it, you have to strip out all the formatting, right? Because it was not about a story, it was not about a narrative, it was not about an opinion, it was about instructions, dot point instructions. So yesterday we had to read a text, and we all thought that was rather funny, having to read a text when somebody was speaking a text. It creates dissonance, you can't do it. You know, people get confused reading because you read faster. I read everything before the speaker talked, so it's not an effective way of using a PowerPoint, right? The presentation was fantastic, but that tool was not meant to be used like that, right? Yeah. We have to invent the tools, and what we're going to share with you is our attempt to bring together philosophers, English majors, computer scientists, engineers. We have to bring them together to create the tools that we want. They might make mistakes, we have to try them out, and that's what we've done. And that's why we're in America. Why would Australians go to America? We went to America because in Australia there are no money. There's not a lot of money to do this kind of thing. In America, the money's there. The will is not there any more than it is here, but at least the resources are there. In Europe, you can get together to do this kind of work. It matters that we invent, not just use. So he will show you the Scholar platform that we've made, and then the products that we've tried to, the program offerings that we've tried to put it. So I just wanted to set up the framework and the imperative and what the affordances are that will take us to inventing new ways of solving what we've always wanted to do and couldn't do in the traditional classroom, but could do into the future if we're to prepare the citizens, learners and workers for the future, the very complex and dangerous future that is in front of us. Bill, thank you. He's following.